the first idea I wanted to throw out at you is working. Um, um, I've been helping families with their finances since, well, let's just say 35 years. I know I don't look that old, but 35 years is a long time to sit through a lot of conversations, to hear a lot of stories, a lot of goals, a lot of ambitions, a lot of frustrations. I've seen just about anything you could ever imagine. I would guess, and I don't say this arrogantly, I would guess that I hear things more honestly than probably most people's pastors do, because their money is really close to their life. And so people will tell me things that are so shocking that I can't even repeat them. Like I don't bring them home to the dinner table. And so most anything that you're ever going to go through, I probably have gone through it through somebody else at some point in time. And so as I was preparing for this, about two and a half years ago, I sent a email to some of my most trusted friends that do what I do, and some of my most trusted friends that have been successful in managing their resources. So I was asking them this question: what would be the top 5 pieces of advice you would give a recent graduate? And so there's probably 20 people that responded to it. These are people, many of them are millionaires, many of them have, a lot of experience in life. And so I just kind of went through their thoughts and considered what they said and kind of integrated my own into it. And so that's why I broke down the thoughts to working, your work life, transporting or your mobility, dwelling, your housing, what are you going to do with housing, living, what are you going to do with your time, and then saving, what do you do with the resources that you have so that you don't spend them all. So that's kind of the basic outline that I had for tonight. So with working, the first thing I would say is learn to like what you do. We're probably going into a slower economy than we've been in a while. A lot of the governments along the coast are closing down their economy. It's going to increase unemployment. Increased unemployment makes the workforce more competitive. And so those people looking for jobs in a recessed economy often aren't able to find their ideal job. And so what it may cause you to do is to take a job less than you anticipated. But I mentioned you all have the mind of Christ, and you can learn to like what you do. And to like what you do, it just means framing what you're doing differently than what everybody else does. You are exchanging your life for an amount of money, your life being your time, when you take a job. And so that time that you exchange might not be what you went to college for, or what you'd ever, maybe you want to be a fireman and you always dreamed of putting out fires and they don't have any openings. So now you work in the convenience store. So how do you reframe your thoughts for not being a fireman and working at the convenience store? And so that's going to take wisdom. That's going to take something different. But maybe the whole idea of work is to integrate you into culture so they would see the life of Christ in you. And so if you can see your world that way and realize that the world needs to see love, life, and hope, maybe you don't have to pick exactly how you work, but if you can work with the power of the Spirit working in you, liking what you do will impact people around you and also make you more marketable. Because as an employer for probably 30 years, I've had a variety of different people. And if you go into a work situation and you want, what's in it for me, that generally doesn't impress the employer. The employer has a lot of stresses in their life. And so if you can like what you do and bring encouragement to your employer as well as your skills and talents, then you will find yourself doing really well in life. Additionally, in working, this one came from a friend of mine. He said, get a job and check your ego at the door. It's kind of in that same idea, is that depending on the size of the organization you work for, my first job was with a business that had over 60,000 employees. And that's not designed for my personality. I need to work in a small place. I need to be the boss, actually, because I'm so different the way I think. And yet, when I was working at a place in 60,000 employees, my opinion really was just 1 out of 60,000, right? and so to have an influence in some place like that, I had to humble myself to realize that I'm not going to change this place. I'm going to only influence and impact the place where I am, the small group that I was in. These are all ideas that have to do with your management resources, including your compensation. So, they may not seem intuitively like it has to do with money, but these things all will convert to resources, according to my experience. The third part of working, a friend that I really respect pointed this out: learn to communicate verbally and written, publicly and privately. You are all in a time in history where communication is probably I don't want to offend you guys because we don't all know each other. So communication for you all is in I don't even know how you guys do it, thumb punched little messages or something like that. You don't even use your whole fingers, you just thumbs, I don't know, but you don't use punctuation, you don't use some of the younger people I hang out with, they don't like to take phone calls, and so you don't have the influence of voice inflection, body language, and things like that. And so those of you who choose to improve your communication skills in the more traditional ways, I think will find yourself elevating in the career pursuits that you have, because the communication component is probably as weak as I can remember it during my career right now. And so learning to do those things, like I said, verbally and written and publicly and privately. I had to take a Dale Carnegie course when I was your age, and I was knocked down because I was a horrible public speaker. I had to learn to speak publicly, and I could tell you stories that are hilarious about that process, but I think that is great wisdom within your working world. Converting your working to economics, it's not really what you earn that matters. I've got a lot of friends that earn a lot of money, but they at the same time spend a lot, and it's what you keep of what you earn. And so if you understand that principle, you will likely find yourself able to work in a situation that doesn't maybe pay as much as what you had thought, and enjoy life better because you've learned to live within your means. And so there's a pyramid. If you drew a pyramid like this, the bottom of it is going to be the lower wage jobs that are out there. The closer you get to the pinnacle of that pyramid, the more your responsibilities are, the more stress that's going to come with that, and the fewer alternatives you will have should you lose that role. The closer you are to the bottom of that, the easier it is to replace a job. The higher you are to that pyramid, the more difficult it's going to be. And I forget the data, but it's I think it's something like for every $10,000 you earn, it will take a month of time searching for that job. And so if somebody was making $100,000 and they lost that job, they might be unemployed for 10 months. So just know that if you can realize what you keep is more important than what you earn, you may not have to go as high up on that pyramid as what you had thought earlier. Another idea several of my friends have said, it's really how I've rolled, is take risk in your career. Everybody generally takes the easy way out and they do what everybody else does. But if you take a risk, it will make life more adventurous, which is what I said one of the keys was to, I think, good management of your resources. And there's just more opportunities if you're willing to take risks with your career. Those are my thoughts on the working world. Maybe I'll stop for a second and see if there's any questions, comments, or thoughts on that before I jump to transportation.
Oh, I got a texted question right here. Okay, here's the question. What risk could you take in a career?
What risk?
Oh wait, hold on.
Um,
We got a part two, I think. What do
you
you
there?
mean? What do you mean in taking a risk?
Um, let me see here. I think the definition of risk is an outcome. One definition is possibility of loss. Um, a more common one is just an outcome different than what you would hope for or expected. That, the possibility of loss is probably why our country is locked down like it is right now, is that leadership, in my opinion, aren't willing to make decisions that make sense for the risk that's out there. And so they're painting a broad brush across their decision grid. And so individually, how do you take risk? You look at a situation and consider, if this goes opposite of what I desire it to do, what's the outcome going to look like? And so when I was 29 years old, well, it's probably about 25, a gentleman asked me to start a business for their organization. There wasn't an internet then, so that dates me a little bit. So to start the business that they wanted me to start, I had to do a lot of research. You couldn't just Google the questions. So I had to go actually to the library, maybe to multiple libraries. I had to phone call people and find out how to get that done. And so I had to take the risk to do that. And some of that risk was doing things on my free time. Maybe even prior to that one, when I was working at Texas Instruments, I was probably making 50% more than my peers that I graduated from Murray State with. And probably within 24 months of leaving college, I was making probably 80% of what my mom and dad had in their career at that point, having been working 30 years. So I was making a pretty substantial income relative to my age at that point. And I didn't like what I was doing, and I quit. I just quit the job because I wanted to help people with their money, and I did not have another job. That is a real life example of risk. And I was like the Beverly Hillbillies. I loaded up my stuff from Houston, Texas, and drove to Indianapolis without a job. And so that might sound risky to some of you, might not. To me, it was a risky move because I was making a good amount of money, and I wasn't going to lose that job. I could have continued that job and still probably made a lot of money, but I just didn't enjoy it, and I couldn't navigate liking what I was doing in a way to stay put. So those are two risks that I did. And in kind of reviewing the notes of my friends, one of the points that they pointed out is it's a lot easier to take career risk when you're in your 20s than when you're in your 50s. And so now's the time to take risk if you're considering them. That answer it, Janelle? Any other questions before I jump on to transportation?
And everyone, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to just jump in with a question, or you can text me or put it there in the chat. Anything goes there.
That is absolutely right. I'm happy to listen to your wonderful voices and answer those questions as well. I am multitasking here and see if I can get what I want here for you. All right, I'm going to share can I share my screen? Did you give me screen sharing privileges?
No, but I will.
Okay.
Okay, you should be good now.
I'm good. These were not in my planned thoughts. Trying to see if I can. That one's pretty close. Okay. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm talking about transportation here. I am not a car person. I have a lot of friends that are car people. Can you see this car right over here? This kind of bluish colored car here. Y'all see that? Shake, 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 shake. Okay. Now let me pull up another one here. 19. My internet moves slowly when I'm doing this. So do you see this Camaro up here on the top right hand? Where'd it go? Can you see that? When I graduated from Murray State, I had this job offer to move to Texas. I knew that I was making a large wage compared to a lot of my peers. A buddy of mine got a job with IBM, and IBM was like that was the major leagues back then. That was the company you wanted to work for. That might be Amazon or Google, something like that today. And we went into the Chevy dealership, and we did a negotiation to buy some of these Camaros, so we would have had to take out a car loan right out of college to get that Camaro, and it was cool. It was a cool ride. And I went home and told my dad I was going to buy this car. I'm literally leaving my dad's house and moving to Texas, and I didn't really need his opinion at that point. And he pointed out that was probably a bad decision. So I ended up driving this thing, this Datsun 200 SX, which was, it was a kind of a cool car. And the fact of the matter is that Camaro may very well, because I would have had a car payment, have wrecked my career opportunity to be a financial advisor, because my income dropped so dramatically as a financial advisor that I got this car paid for because the car payment was a lot less than what the Camaro would have been. And so I was able to drive a car and eat peanut butter sandwiches and do a lot of things when I wasn't making any money earlier in my career. But this was the car I drove for probably 5 years. And by the time I got rid of it, my dad had bolted a piece of plywood right underneath my foot because my shoes were melting and my pants would get wet when I was going to meetings on rainy days. And so that was the car that I had the first 5 years of my career. Later in my career, I don't know if can you see this van right here? Later in my career, once we started multiplying and having kids, I got this van. I'm not sure if that's the color it was. It looks really close. Could be the ugliest vehicle in the last 30 years. I'm not sure. I think of back in the 70s, there was a car called the Pacer and one called the Gremlin, but this would qualify for it. And I almost gave that, they almost had to pry my fingers off this car to let it go. I was making a large income. This thing was paid for. I could have bought probably about any kind of car I wanted. The air conditioner didn't work. I was all sweaty getting to work on this thing, but it was paid for, and I just didn't see the point in letting it go. And so, so my personality has never been driven by cars. That's kind of a pun. I didn't intend it, but I understand that other people are motivated by cars. However, a vehicle is simply a means from point A to point B. And depending on what your point A to point B is, a lot of times, maybe 90 to 95% of the time, cars sit in parking lots and they're not driven. And so to commit a large portion of your income to something that's just sitting in a parking lot doesn't make a lot of sense to me, particularly if you're really wanting to maximize your life experience. And so as a financial advisor, I understand that people buy cars for a lot of different reasons and they spend a lot of money on them. I know that very few people actually pay cash for cars. We started paying cash for cars probably 25, 30 years ago. And so when you do that, then you can have really more of your choice what kind of car you drive, and not be destined to have to keep working to pay your car payment. So if I was gonna say, okay, you know, knock yourself out, enjoy a car, you don't have to drive the Datsun 200SX or the aluminum minivan. What would I do? I would only buy used cars, first of all. If I wanted to get something a little more stylish, I would then buy recently new cars if I had enough cash flow to do that. So if I wanted something that had a little sizzle, I would buy recently new cars. Never buy a new one until you had the resources that it wasn't a significant impact on you. A friend of mine that's a multimillionaire, he just said cars are a bad investment. And I wouldn't even say they're investment unless, you know, you're buying some kind of elite kind of car. Cars are just an expense is all they are. I said my strategy is to pay cash for cars, whatever cash you have, buy the best car you can with that cash, and then whatever car payment you were going to commit to, pay that to yourself. If you could pay that car payment to yourself, use that bucket of money that you saved up and use it for maintenance on the junky car you bought with cash. And then after 3 years, take whatever bucket of cash you have left and that car, and then buy a car with cash at that point. You do that about 2 or 3 times, and you'll have a really, really nice car. And that's the best strategy I know to having nice cars and not getting yourself in debt. And if you do it that way, you actually will see appreciation in your cars versus depreciation if you're paying yourself rather than paying the bank for your car payment. That's about all I got to say about cars. I did buy a new car. I bought it 5 years ago. It was an expensive car. I drove it to a work event probably 30 days after I bought it. I think one of my clients hit and ran on me. Dented my front fender. I think it did $2,000 worth of damage. So my new car wasn't very new very long after that. Then maybe 60 days after that, I was heading down to Hardin for some kind of retreat, and somebody nearly killed me. I was stopped at a stoplight, and they didn't stop. They hit me going about 60 miles an hour. It took that thing and just, like if you ever stepped on an aluminum can, that's what it did to the back of my car. The insurance company wouldn't total it out. So they took my car apart like Legos and then put it back together. And so this new car that I paid a lot of money for, it's still the car I'm driving, but it was never, like I didn't have a new car experience probably more than 30 days. And so it's nice to have cars that you don't pay a lot of money for, because if people bang on them and you know, mess them up, you don't get quite as emotional about it. But cars are just a mode to get from point A to point B. All right, I'm done with cars. Any questions on cars or transportation? If you live in a city, you could maybe get away without even having a car. You could probably use Uber or Lyft to get you from point A to point B and really save a lot of money, because you wouldn't, if you use those things, you would never have to pay for car insurance. You wouldn't have to spend time worrying about that. So just thoughts depending on how close you are to a city.
I've got a text question here. Could you repeat the plan about buying used cars and doing it 3 times?
Yes. If, let's say I had, I think you could go to like cars.com or something, I don't know what website, and say you had $3,000 saved up. I don't know if that's a lot of money or little money, but just say you saved up. If you had a $300 a month car payment, I don't even know what car payments are these days, but say you had a $300 car payment, take you 10 months to save up $3,000, right? 10 times 300 is 3,000. I don't know how quick you all are with math. I'm just trying to be funny. So so 10 months of $300 a month, you got $3,000. Now you take that $3,000 and you go out on cars.com, Carvana, I guess they deliver it to you. I don't know. You get the best $3,000 car you can get, right? Then you pay yourself that $300 a month car payment. You're not paying it to the bank. You have a car now, but you're saving $300 a month. Every 12 months, that's $3,600. Got me? 12 times 300, 3,600. So after 24 months, that's $7,200. After a year, what's that? $10,800. After 3 years, you got $10,800 saved up. You may have had to spend $2,000 of that on maintenance over those 3 years. Janelle, you follow me? You look like I lost you in the math. Are we good? Or did I go too fast? We're good? All right, so let's round to 11,000 instead of 10,800. We subtract the 2,000 for maintenance. We got $9,000 that we've saved up by paying ourselves the car payment. If the $3,000 car depreciated, and we're just gonna say $300 a year, we went from 3,000 minus 900 to $2,100 in value in the car, right? Did you follow that? Okay. So we went to 2,100 and we saved 9,000 after expenses. Now we have $11,100. You go to cars.com and look at what you can get for $11,100. You can get a really nice car. And if you just do that math, you probably only have to do it 6 years and you've got a really nice car on a cash basis. If you're able to do that, my guess is you're going to drive a blue Lumina because it feels too good to pay for something that you own, and to drive something you own versus to go out and have to fight the car dealerships to get a different car. Another idea with cars, say you have $1,000 car, okay? And you have a mechanic for which you trust, and they tell you it's going to cost $2,000 to get it running. My opinion is you might want to spend the $2,000. You just simply have to ask the mechanic this question. If I pay this $2,000, how long will this car stay on the road in your opinion? This is a mechanic you trust, right? So if he or she says, this will keep it on the road for 3 years, and you just paid $2,000 for it, you've saved a lot of money by not getting into the car payment trap. And so a lot of people, their logic is, I'd never pay a $2,000 for a $1,000 car. Fact of the matter is, it might be worth it to keep you from getting in the hole with your car payments. Just thinking differently is all I'm saying. How are we doing? Okay, we still have some time. All right, dwelling. I'm bored with cars. Let's go into dwelling. Fact of the matter is, renting is more economical than owning. Did y'all know that? Kim's smiling. She must. You have to. The bigger your dwelling space is, the more expensive it is. I'm looking around this room. I over my shoulder, I've got a pinball machine. I've got a mistake on the wall that I made. I've got clothes hanging over here. I've got stuff on the bookshelf. The bigger the space is, the more junk you can fill it up with, which means if you didn't have that space, you probably wouldn't have bought that junk because you wouldn't have had any place to put it. So you would have saved space. The more space you have, the more you're going to pay in maintenance, the more you're going to pay in insurance, the more you're going to pay in just time of your life. If we had a couple, maybe a month or so ago, we had a drain that got clogged up, and it ended up taking 10 hours of my life to get that drain clogged up. And so there's just, if you're just looking at the pure economics, renting is generally going to be a better choice than owning. Owning is more of a quality of life choice. Owning gives you some privacy you probably aren't going to have with renting. Owning gives you some more space you're probably not going to have with renting. Owning may or may not be a good economic decision. I don't know. It's just hard to know. If you take all the expenses into the equation of owning a house, it's hard to tell what you can do. The people historically on the coast, wherever there's water, those properties have generally done better than houses that aren't around water, and so that's kind of the reality of it. The bigger the house, the more your expenses are going to be. The bigger the house, the more of your time it's going to take. If you're going to, when you're making living decisions where you're going to dwell, if you can live with roommates, that's going to be more economical for you because you're just going to split expenses. It's going to create some opportunities for you to learn life skills when you have roommates that you might not learn otherwise. and may improve your communication skills, which we discussed a little earlier, your conflict management skills and things like that. If and when you do buy, don't count on appreciation. Pay off your house as quickly as you can. One of my friends' point of view was to use a starter house or even buy a duplex where you can maybe rent out half of it to help offset your expenses on it. But yeah, the idea of a dream house is, I think, created by realtors. I just think a house is just whatever you make it, and I've been in some very, very big houses, and I don't know that they're any more of a home than a small house is. A home is what you're looking for, not a house. You good with dwelling? I'm bored with dwelling places. I could live anywhere. I'm pretty content with living. Any questions?
So
no
it's
questions.
Still more
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Is it still more economical, even though when you're done renting a house, you have nothing to show for it, I guess, but when you're done owning a house, you have the money you get from selling that house? Does that not offset
Well, when you're in your 20s, probably renting an apartment's a better decision. That comes with some creepy variables that I won't discuss here, but I lived in an apartment probably till I was 28 and experienced all kinds of things there. But if you rent a house, you're gonna generally absorb some of the expenses that you would with ownership, and that's okay. It just the math of the way a mortgage works is it's going to take you generally a few years before you build equity in there. There's a principle. I'm old, so there was a thing on the playgrounds when I was a kid called the teeter-totter. I don't know if you guys had those or not. It's a wooden board that laid across a piece of metal, and you put one person on one end, and you would teeter and totter back and forth here. And with guys, when we did it back in the olden days, it was a game of trust, because one of you would always jump off and leave the other person that like got slammed on the ground. That was just part of the thing. And so that idea of that teeter-totter is what's called a leverage. And buying a house is leveraging something. And in economics and in asset ownership, anytime you use a lever, it allows you to pick up something more than you could ordinarily do yourself. And most people don't understand leverage. And so when you buy a house and you don't have resources, you're leveraging something, and you can get squashed like a bug very quickly if things turn against you. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just saying that's what happens. And most people don't understand that. And that was one of my points later. See my notes here. I scribbled it in my notes. I'm not seeing it right now. Yeah, I put one of the things I put later was be a lifelong learner. And when it gets to the specifics about finances, is to understand certain parts of your finances. And most people don't understand debt at all. They don't have any idea how it works. And if it turns against you, it's very damaging. And we've probably during my lifetime maybe only had 2 or 3 times where mortgages turned against people, but historically when they do turn against people, they can be pretty brutal. A rent, if the economy gets tough in a rent, they kick you out and you go live in a tent or something like that. It doesn't devastate you, but a mortgage could be pretty devastating if things turn against you. Ready to move on? And any of you that want to reach out to me, feel free to. I can elaborate on any of these ideas. Look at my clock behind here. Yeah, I'm happy to elaborate on any of these. I'm just I'm like water skiing. I'm going on the top of the water on these ideas, so you guys don't have to go through all these cassette tapes with me. So I'm willing to replay the cassette tapes if you want more information. The next bullet I said is living. Paxton Pritchett wants in if you'll let him in, or her. I don't know if Paxton's. I have ADD issues. I'm sorry. Living is the next topic. I just broke all these things into what made sense to me, but living, that's what all these things you're doing so you can experience life, right? You're not doing these things to accumulate wealth. Like if you're trying to build bigger and bigger silos, it's just not going to work out very well. What you're trying to do is to allow the spirit within you, allow you to make the most out of life today, whatever that looks like. And if you read the Proverbs, a lot of these things I'm talking about, you can make some really foolish decisions with your resources. And the main thing they do when you make foolish decisions is just cause you to have to spend time doing things that aren't very fun. And so I'm just throwing out ideas to help you avoid doing things that aren't fun. Because you can make all kinds of foolish decisions, and you're the only one that's going to understand what it costs you in time. So as I look at living, Bob, probably I was about a lot of your guys' age when Bob and I became friends, and he just hammered in my head this idea: choose the excellent over the good. And another way he said is say no to the good in life, because you only have so much time in life, and time can't be replaced. It's not a replenishable resource. Money can be replaced. If you make a bad decision with money, you can always replace it, but time is not coming back. You're not ever getting that back. And so you choosing the excellent over the good and saying no to the good, and giving yourself time and energy to wait for the excellent. You have to, the great baseball players, I hate to use sporting analogies, they would, when they were looking for a pitch, they would wait for their pitch and then just hit it when the ball is there. And that's how they became great. They didn't swing at everything. Well, that's the same thing in life. You can't chase everything that moves. You have to say no to good things. And it's hard. If you don't know who you are in Christ, it's hard because the evil one would tell you you're a loser because you say no to things. And humans may even tell you you're a loser. However, you're more than just mere men. You're spiritual beings. And if you can just wait for the sweet spot when that right thing comes, you're going to have the appropriate amount of time and energy to say yes to that. But if you can't do that, if you can't wait on the excellent, you say yes to a lot of good things, you're going to be busy doing things that don't matter, and it's going to burn out that energy and that resource that you have called time. So that's one of the living principles I throw out there to you. Stay humble. It's a constant thing I saw from a lot of people that I asked their opinion. Stay curious. Curiosity is what keeps me smiling. I'm as curious now as I've ever been about things. Even my vocation, I'm spending as much time on my vocation because it energizes me, even at this point after 35 years. And so curiosity is going to make it a fun thing, and learning to ask curious questions to people is going to open doors of opportunity of ministry and expressing love to people. And that curiosity, back before everybody had piercings, like piercings are, I don't want to offend any of you guys if you have piercings, but there was a day when piercings were unusual. And so I would just ask people about their piercings, or when tattoos weren't just so ordinary, I would ask people about, I don't even do it anymore because they're so ordinary but to have a curiosity about people would create opportunities and things. And most people, like with a piercing or a tattoo, they don't do those things to be unnoticed, right? I don't think so. And so I would ask questions about those things. And so having curiosity about most things is what will keep life interesting. Having a curiosity about God is probably the prime thing that you need to keep in mind, and stay curious about Him. As you stay curious about Him, opportunities are going to create themselves for you. With regards to specific finances with living, I'd say live in a frugal manner early so you can live luxuriously later. If I like it, the math on that is just so ridiculous that if you want to live in a luxury when you don't have the money to do it, you're never going to be able to afford to live luxuriously or do things that are luxuries, and you're going to always have stress. But if you can live frugally for a few years, the luxuries that you want will be ordinary at that point. And most likely you may not even care about those luxuries that much. One of my friends who's just done an amazing job with his resources over life, when I asked him the question of what would you tell a recent graduate, one of his responses was craft beer is expensive. And I said, well, I like craft beer. And he goes, well, you can afford it. And he said, you said, what would I tell a recent graduate? And I'm like, oh, that's true. They can't afford it. They can't afford to breathe barely. So he's just saying, what he was saying is the luxuries that are ordinary once you've hit that point are not luxuries that you should do when you can't afford them. So I added to that, I said bougie coffee is expensive. I said dining out is expensive. And you can determine what else is expensive. Like suppose somebody makes $100,000 and you make $10,000, right? And you both choose to buy a $5 drink. Who is the $5 drink more expensive to? And you don't know what somebody else is drinking or eating or why they have a car, right? So if you're trying to do the same things that somebody else is doing, you're probably doing it out of ignorance. You need to look yourself in the mirror because you have no idea what resources somebody else might have to do the things that they do. But I would suppose that most of you really can't afford fancy coffee would be my guess. Just a guess. I don't want to step on your toes, but I'm just guessing. Debt is your enemy. You don't want to, you don't want to get in debt. A friend of mine taught me many, many years ago, consumer debt would be cars, credit cards, maybe college loans, and then I just consider a mortgage something other than that. And a friend of mine taught me many, many years ago that the family that chooses to can be consumer debt free in 3 years and completely debt free in 7 years. Consumer debt free in 3 years, completely debt free in 7 years. And I think that's still true. The fact of the matter is most lending institutions aren't going to lend you so much money that isn't true, because they know that if you can't do that, then you're going to default on their loans. And so, but choosing to do that means you'll have to give up a lot of luxuries for the short term. Imagine that when we first bought our first house, that we had a $2,000 a month mortgage, and we paid that off within 7 years. Okay, the mortgage was gone in 7 years. So all of a sudden, our income didn't drop. So all of a sudden, we had $2,000 a month that we didn't have to spend anymore. You think we could afford a cup of coffee? Could we afford a trip? I mean, we could do a lot of things. And that fits back into that idea that I said, live a frugal manner early and luxuriously later.
Can I ask
most of the people that, no, most of the people, yes.
What is consumer debt?
Credit cards, car payments. I would even throw your student loans in there. What else could you get? Any other? Can you guys have any other kind of loans besides that?
A coffee tab. I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. So what the other like what wouldn't be consumer debt would be like a house?
Yes. Yes. A mortgage is what a house loan's called.
Hey, Keith.
We good? Yes.
I have a question, but it might be a little bit on a different topic, but it's sort of like a summing up of everything you talked about. So we're talking about wisdom, and you mentioned how like the Psalms and the Proverbs have a lot of wisdom in there to help us make good decisions instead of learning things the hard way, or in some cases not even learning it but still going through the hard way. um, I realize, so I remember how Bob would talk about how you convert how you look at time and money, how much you make per hour, and you can convert between them. And as we also want to know God, and so like I guess kind of what I'm asking, I'll give a personal example. I just got a job that it's part time, but while I'm training, there's sort of some full time hours going into that too, and it's kind of been a little bit of a shock to me how like, oh wow, my time's getting away from me, and I have to really choose what the important things are. Um, but I understand that there's a lot of wisdom in the scriptures and in the people that know wisdom and know God that I want to know, and if I'm not careful, time will get away from me, and I won't have gained that wisdom because I won't have invested that time to learn it. So what might be some, with all the things that we have, and then there's other concepts in scripture besides just those practical wisdoms like our identity in Christ and living by the Spirit, things that are also very, very important. What do you think is a good insight maybe into pursuing wisdom whenever we find, because it takes time to pursue it whenever we're so pressed for time?
That's a good question. Let me find this Bible verse. Um, 1 Corinthians 6:17 says that, but he who unites himself with the Lord is one spirit with him. And then at the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 2, it says, you currently present tense have the mind of Christ. And you aren't going to get any more of the Spirit. You're not going to get any more of the power than you already have. And so what it requires, I think, is to realize you have the power source of all wisdom right now. And you may have things locked in your brain that are foolish. And so there's ways to write those ideas that are foolishness with godly wisdom in there. And so I think the Spirit will prompt you in those things. Sometimes those rewritings might be a result of just acting out the foolishness that's locked in your brain. You may not know what's foolish until you keep busting up against that wall, but to spend your time, I don't know how to say this. I feel like in my experience is the Spirit will prompt me on how and when and where and what ways to spend time uniquely with Him and how to do that. And I don't necessarily do it in a regimented way, if that makes any sense. I spend a good amount of time with Him because I realize that every moment that I live, His Spirit's united with me, so I'm with Him all the time. And I just have to be still enough to understand what He's telling me right now. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but that's my answer. Good. So, yeah. So you all have everything. God has granted you everything necessary for life and godliness. It's somewhere in 1 Peter, I think. And so you're not getting anything more than you already have. You have the power source of the universe that's prompting you. You probably just need to slow down enough and learn to listen. Is the main thing. The more it says, be still and know that I'm God, the slower that you can live life, the more you're going to hear His voice. And probably that's harder for you all than for me. One of my kids just harassed me earlier today because they were telling me I'm anti this, but they caught me looking at this. And but the screens are a temptation to distract you from being still, and it's hard. I've got a book on my bookshelf called. Let me look real quick. I must have given it away. I don't see it over there, but it is just talking about the unplugging of technology, and it goes into the details of the technology is not like you're not smarter than your technology. That some of the brightest people in the world are sitting in Google, Facebook, and these places and trying to figure out how to break down your attention span. And they are studying you. They're using artificial intelligence and everything else. And so that's the world system that's working against you all to keep you from being still and knowing God. That may not be their stated purpose, but the technology today is a huge distraction, and it's bigger than you. It's I wish I could think of the name of that book. I'll find it and get it to you, Janelle. But it's pretty humbling when you see. I think Stanford University was where they have a lot of psychological studies on how to break your attention span. You know, the red. They know the red dots on your phone will get your attention, the pings and the notifications, all those things. If you use your computer rather than your phone to access social media things, they don't have you as addicted as they'd like you to have you. And so there's just things like that work against you from being able to be still and know that He's God. Janelle, I'm over by 4 minutes. What do you want me to do? Do you want to keep going, or do you want to pick this up at a to be continued? What do you want to do? I'm flexible.
Oh, we can go part.
I want to be aware of y'all's time.
Well,
I didn't hear you.
We can go part 3 on this thing.
Oh, we could do that.
But
yeah.
Well, if anyone needs to go now, feel free. You're not a weirdo if you need to. But Keith, what does it look like for you to keep going? Does that take a lot of your?
I bet I just looking at my notes. I probably have 15 more minutes of thoughts.
Yeah, I'd love to continue. If anyone does need to jump off, please feel free. But yeah, let's finish this out.
So I'm talking about the topic of living, and I talked about live in a frugal manner early so you can live luxuriously later. One of my friends said, find like-minded people to encourage you in your journey. So I can't remember if I talked about the spectrum of spenders and savers on the last time or not, but if you draw like a semicircle and you put spender on one side and saver on the other side, and you've got that whole spectrum that like the saver, the person that's an extreme saver, they save like the bulk of anything they earn, right? The spender spends the bulk of anything they earn and anything they can borrow. That makes sense. So you've got, those are the two extremes, and then you've got people all along that kind of semicircle spectrum. The spenders are the life of the party, and the savers are the most boring people you're ever going to meet, because they're not generous. They're just going to pile money up, and so most people are somewhere on that spectrum, right? And there's not really an appropriate place to be. That's just where you are. I tend to believe that some of that's innate in the way that you were born and that your flesh was created, and so if you are a spender, to sit through a Dave Ramsey course might just send you right over the edge, because that course would suggest that you can change your personality to be a saver. And my experience is that's not true. If you're a saver and you sit through a Dave Ramsey course, you're going to keep saying amen. You are the greatest, Dave Ramsey. And so if you take that idea and then you watch people and how they respond to those things, you'll just see that those ideas tend to add fuel or extinguish the unique flesh of somebody. And I'm nothing against Dave Ramsey. I'm just saying that people are just naturally spenders or savers. And I used to try to help dissuade the spenders from spending, and didn't have much cause, but I actually like hanging out with the spenders. They're more fun. So you're somewhere on that spectrum. And should you find a significant other to spend your time with, they're going to be somewhere on that spectrum. They're probably not going to be where you are. You're going to have probably a boring existence if you are. You need to kind of have some diversity there. And so if it is a semicircle, right, and say you're both kind of across that semicircle from each other, and you drew a line from one point to the other, I would call that line the point of conflict. That makes sense? Where you are on that spectrum, different from your significant other, is a point of conflict, because in your brain, you're thinking you think right about this, and in their brain, they're thinking they think right. And who's the mediator of that, right? And so that variance is just going to be conflict, and until you understand that people are different. And then it goes back to that importance of communication, is to communicate about that and try to understand. And there's a lot of reasons people are different places on that spectrum. So I'm more on the spender side, or the saver side of things. And so for me to spend is much more difficult than for me to save. So I could teach you all how to save, but it's really kind of hardwired in me. Like I said, over my shoulder, you can see a couple luxuries back there. There's that pinball machine, and then my mistake that's up on the wall. And so there's those are things that evolve with just time. But I think that if you can learn to work towards the middle with people where they are and not judge them where they are, because there's a lot of reasons they might be where they are in their spending situation. But find somebody like-minded to encourage you, and then maybe even have friends that aren't like-minded to try to understand how other people think about those situations. In that kind of that same living, I had a friend that said that spending money on adventures is much more gratifying than on things. And that's kind of been one of my life principles, that I don't buy a lot of stuff. I'd rather go do something interesting and have the memory rather than have the thing. Anything what was that old saying? The more stuff you have, the less time, money, and maybe energy you have to invest in others and in God and things that are important. So the more stuff, your stuff is going to cost you time. Adventures, once you've expended them, they're gone, and you don't have to put any more time or money in those usually. So unless you choose RVing for your adventure, then that can consume some more of those things. Another friend that's a professional financial advisor, one of his top 5 things is be cheerful in all circumstances. And that's just a big deal. It's hard to do that. Like, I quit watching the news about 30 years ago because the news, one of their principles is if it bleeds, it leads. If they can stir conflict, anything that the news can do to create negative energy, that's what it's about. And so I realized in a bout of depression back in the early 90s that I couldn't watch the news. It was dragging me down. And so to understand that cheerfulness is critical, even in appreciating your resources, is a big deal, and probably not talked too much about with financial professionals or even people that are telling you how to manage your resources. And part of that cheerfulness was on that top 5 things I gave you. I don't know where I put that card, but generosity wins, I think is what I said. And so generosity brings cheerfulness to you. I wrote down, be a lifelong learner. I know Andrew digs fish, and so Andrew could tell me all kinds of stuff about fish that I would never know. And so if I sat down and talked to him about fish, I could learn a lot about fish, probably crazy stories. I know there's fish that have like teeth, and that just freaks me out a little bit. Just the idea that a fish has teeth. And so you can be a lifelong learner and use that even with communication, that when you're in a social setting and you care more about the person that you're around and you ask them questions, you can learn, be curious with them, and that's going to bring the living component of your life into a really cool thing. And being curious and a lifelong learner doesn't really cost anything unless you choose to buy that stuff, but you can be curious online and find out all kinds of creative things today. And just with this small group here, you could probably learn a lot of things about a lot of topics that you had no idea of. One of the people said one of the things you can do by being a lifelong learner, and this, I don't think he was saying this in a judgmental way, but I think he's just saying your skills of observation is you can observe habits to avoid. Have you ever seen a habit that you might want to avoid? And you can learn from the negative, right? We always think you learn from the positive, you can learn from the negative. And so friends that you have that have bad habits, you can still love them and be their friends, but you can learn about those situations and learn the cost of those things. Another friend, this advisor was not a believer, I don't think. He said, recognize and embrace, no one owes you anything. In our household, when I became a dad and the kids quickly figured out there was a phrase that would annoy me and cause me challenges. So we quickly made a rule, which we don't have many rules, never had many rules, that they couldn't use this F 4-letter word, and the word was fair. Life's not fair. It's just not fair. So when my kids would tell me life's not fair, I just shrugged and like, yeah, that's not fair. It's not going to be. There's nothing fair about life. And so expecting it to be fair sets you up for some disappointing things, I think. Yeah, life is just life. It's. I think it was Peter that says, like, why are you so worked up about this bad circumstance that happened to you because you think you're going through some kind of fiery ordeal? And he basically said, it's just life. And every time, that's my translation of it, but I just think it's funny. Like, not that you get, I'm not laughing because you guys go through bad circumstances, but I just know we can't get out of this life without bad circumstances. And so to expect it to be fair is foolishness, in my opinion. You okay with that? Or did I just offend you all? We're good? Okay. All right, the last topic I had is saving. I'm really skilled at this one, and I don't say that boastfully, just say it is. It's just more of an, I don't know if it's a fleshly pattern, a natural thing. I was a loan shark by the time I was 10 or 12. I have 2 siblings, and neither one of them were naturally savers, and they were both older than me, and I was earning interest off of them from the time I was 10 or 12. I would charge them usury rates on using my stuff, and to this date, and I'm not bad-mouthing my siblings, I'm saying nothing has changed. Like our ability to manage resources has not changed relatively significantly over the last 50 years. And so, so saving is, I'm good at it just because it's natural for me. And so whatever I say about it, don't think I'm boasting. I could have been one of my siblings where it's unnatural for them. And so I would encourage you, if you are a saver, if you desire to be a saver, is to find a financial advisor who will help you and coach you. A financial advisor, if I were looking for one, it would just be a coach that would invest some time. I mean, most of them probably won't put time with you because usually you have to have money to motivate them. And So you would just have to call a financial advisor and ask them if they would take on a special project and invest in you. And then you'd have to test to see if they had any wisdom or not. If they don't, then you want to move on to somebody else that might invest in you, or ask friends that they may know somebody that would spend some time with you. But just coach you early on, because if you get some good habits early, you're going to avoid some problems later. I would, the second point under saving is I would invest your resources and understand inflation. There is no safe investment out there. There's no safe place to put your money. If you try to be safe, usually whenever you try to be safe in life, you're taking the most risk. It's just it's kind of one of life's paradoxes, is that the safest decisions you try to make a lot of times are the riskiest. If you took it in a personal relationship or a personal situation, when you're trying to make a safe decision, you're probably missing out on greater opportunities by taking the risk. And it's the same thing with money and resources. The safe things usually tend to be more risky than you know. And taking risk is not bad. Parable of Talents, if you read that and you think of it from the point of view of resources, the master entrusted money to people. And if you read those examples, my guess is he wasn't gone very long, the master, because if you're gone for a real long period of time, you might lose those resources. And so the people that were entrusted the more talents, by the time he came back, those people had doubled those resources. If you remember the story, they doubled them. And to double a resource takes, you're taking risk to double something. The person that got in trouble was buried in the backyard and didn't take any, they thought they weren't taking any risks. They took more risks than the people who actually put the managers or the owner's capital at risk, because they trusted him enough to put the capital at risk. The person that buried it didn't trust the owner enough. And your life is a resource that you need to learn to trust to the Father to take risk with it, because if you safely make it to 90 years old and you never did anything, he's not going to go, you made it to 90. That's not what he's going to do. He's going to say, I was prompting you to do this and prompting you to do that. And you might say, but if I had done that, I might have died at 40. And he's like, yeah, you'd have been here with me for these last 50 years instead of sitting in that nursing home, right? Like, and that's the real life example of learning risk is not bad. And our culture does not like risk. Our culture thinks it's a horrible thing. And that's, I'm not gonna get off on my COVID tangent anymore. It's just that you're probably not gonna die of COVID. You're probably gonna survive COVID. It's like a 99.9% chance you're gonna be okay. And so, so what isn't gonna happen for most people aren't gonna live. They're gonna stay back from any risk. They're gonna stand away from anything that gets their heart pumping. And I can't help you with that. I'm just saying that there is risk in any decision. It's called opportunity cost is what it's called. And so every decision you make has an opportunity cost. And as for me, I'd rather go out swinging than rust out. So that's my thoughts on that. Retirement is an invented idea. It was invented because in a historical perspective, if you watch what's going on the last 6 months, it kind of reinforces this. It's not the old people that riot. Old people do not riot. If you can find any historical event where the old people rioted, let me know, but it's the young people that riot. That's just the way it is. And so retirement came to be a thing because the economy wavers and goes up and down. And so if you laid off the young people, they would burn your factory down. That's why retirement was invented. The old people are not going to burn your factory down. So we need to get rid of the old people so the young people will be employed. And so that's what happened. When the people moved off the farm into the city for the Industrial Revolution, they had to figure out what to do with the old people because they had to keep the young people working. And so that's where retirement came from. Then in the U.S. in the 1930s with the Great Depression, we had Social Security, again, to get the old people out of the job so we could get those jobs in the hands of the younger people so the politicians could remain gainfully employed. So that's where retirement came from. And after that, the financial institutions, the insurance companies, banks, and investment companies decided to sell it as an idea. They'd show people sitting on a beach with a fancy drink with an umbrella in it and sell that as an idea, for which what people began doing, mostly since the 80s, what people did is, I hate this job so much, I'm going to do this job until I hate it so much, and I'm going to save as much money as I can so I can stop doing what I hate and start doing what I want to do. And that's what American retirement is. And what I suggested early on in our July meeting is to learn to like what you do. If you can't learn to like what you do, get a different job and learn to like that one, and keep doing that as long as you can, and you will be okay. You won't have to save millions and millions of dollars for retirement. So retirement's an invented idea. If you fret over it too much when you're your age, you're going to miss out on living, and you've risked too much already. Several people say save 10% of what you earn. I think they must have got that from, and most of these weren't also, a lot of my friends aren't Christians. Hopefully I didn't offend you, but I'm guessing it's mostly my non-Christian friends said save 10% of what you earn. And I think it actually came out of like religious teachings that you're supposed to give 10%, which is not in the Bible. But so they would teach you give 10%, save 10%, and then live on the other 80. And like, whatever. It's like, whatever floats your boat. So 10% for some reason is a savings rate that some people think is reasonable. I would say whatever savings rate is reasonable for your unique personality is probably a good thing. And if you're not saving anything, you're just gonna have to work longer. Did you hear that? That's pretty profound right there. I'm just, if you're a spender and you don't save anything, just plan on working longer. It's no big deal. It just is. So, then my friends pointed out that there's things you should understand. Most people don't understand taxes and the impact on your situation. You should probably, if you can get somebody to help explain taxes and how they work and how they impact your situation, that's critical information. If you work for somebody that offers employee benefits, you probably want somebody to help you understand those as well, because that's going to expand your financial abilities. And then you want to understand your expenses or a budget. I don't budget. It's not my personality. Most people would say budgets are a requirement. I've never needed a budget. I've been a loan shark since I was 10. Why would I budget? So I just don't, I'm never going to spend more than what I make unless something happens physically. And so budgets are necessary for some people and they're not necessary for everybody. Usually if you're a spender, a budget's going to cause you to get yourself all stressed out. And there's some principles you can learn if you're a spender that might help you. But I'd say the first step I do if you're a spender is just don't get credit cards, because you're not going to be wise enough to handle them. I'm not judging, I'm just saying, statistically speaking, you're not going to be able to handle them. So, got to be true to one's own self. That's all I know about finances. You know, I am done. I can't tell you guys anything else.